Call this Council and Budget Committee meeting to order. Before we proceed, I want to acknowledge that Indigenous people have occupied the area where we are situated for millennia, and this is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe people, many of whom continue to live in our community and to add to the richness of our community's life. Madam Clerk, the roll call.
All members of council are present, your worship, with the exception of Councillors Flagg and Christensen.
Thank you. There are no announcements, no addendum this evening. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? There being none, then I'm going to hand the chair over to the Chair of Finance, Councillor McDermott.
Thank you, Worship. Before Mr. Jansen speaks, I'd like to bring up our CAO, Chris McLean, to make a comment.
Thank you. Wish to thank Council first for approving the budget schedule that we put forth. Certainly is a lot of information. The schedule is intended to try and keep aligned with the regional budget as well, and trying to keep a specific pace going to sort of pace out some of the information. There's quite a lot of information, and I can appreciate that because this will be my first budget as well through here, and I want to thank Jonathan and his staff for orienting me as much as they've oriented the council and some of the new members of council with the budget prior to tonight. We've been committed to bring back some good information in a format that we hope is understandable, and although we have a budget schedule set out, we are open to modify that and make changes as we need to. If we need to come back, clarify, or reiterate anything or alter the schedule in any way to suit council, we'd be happy to do that. I encourage councillors to ask questions and also follow up with staff outside the budget process if there's any questions that you feel you'd like further information or you didn't get an opportunity to ask through the budget cycle. Certainly encourage you to do that. And I do want to thank Jonathan as well for the leadership on Fort Erie's budget. I've been involved with Fort Erie, as you know, since 2019, helping with the strategic plan, and I've been impressed with the level of rigor and professionalism and leadership Jonathan's brought to council, and also the leadership council's taken over the last several years to put Fort Erie in good financial standing. And you'll see from the budget tonight, and Jonathan will go through some of the measures that he's used and are commonly used as best practices for budget affordability and sustainability. And so with that, I want to thank Jonathan for that guidance, and thank council for holding Fort Erie and putting us in a strong financial position moving forward. And also thank my SMT and corporate services team for helping to prep the budgets and the budgets that you'll see coming forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jonathan to talk about the important information for this evening. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Truly, this is a lot of effort that goes on throughout the year. We'll summarize some of our process throughout the year, but the budget, and this is the first one for 2023, it involves, a lot of staff, a lot of thought and effort into bringing forward what we think is reasonable, affordable, and sustainable in accordance with council objectives. So welcome. We do have, like Chris said, a few new councillors in our budget process this year. So I would just want to say the same things in terms of asking questions. Certainly we try to capture most of what we think is of interest, not only to yourselves fully as council, but to those watching and following along at different stages. And so do feel free to press into any area if there's additional information, any of that. The budget planning report did come before council on October 4th. That did lay out a number of the pressures, a number of the things we were forecasting in prior years at that point in time. Of course, much has changed even since October. But this format is very familiar from past presentations, other than some of the emerging challenges and risks we'll go through, but it does follow much of what we've done in past years. We are trying to enhance this year some of the asset management information that integrates and certainly is a big contributor to setting the path for our capital budget. And really, our budgets as a whole are a great opportunity for us as staff and together with you as council to think about the needs and wants of our community, certainly coming off of an election and being that much more in tune with what our community is saying. This is an excellent opportunity to realign and to rethink that as well. So unless there's any other questions to start, I'll begin. And this is just an agenda for tonight. We'll be looking at some of the inputs in the process that goes into tonight, the highlights of the program that we're bringing forward, risks and opportunities. We will stop at the end of the presentation and allow any presentation questions before agenda item 6, before we look at the capital project worksheets together. And just know we've included that as a separate link on our town e-agenda website with all of the worksheet information for you to follow along there. So as I mentioned, the corporate strategic plan, of course, we're currently working off of our 2018 to 2022 corporate strategic plan, something that is going to be very much an effort early into next year with setting some of our new priorities and objectives. With our budget, we do try and find ways of noting and aligning with that where we can with our current priorities and objectives. Certainly a number of them are very close to what we're bringing forward, whether it's priority number 1 in the plan of optimizing health with a lot of our parks and open space program. Maintaining sustainable infrastructure is a key priority area. Attracting interest and investment in having a state of infrastructure that welcomes and allows that to happen as efficiently as possible are all ones that really relate and integrate into the capital budget. We also have some items that will come forward that have been identified or recommended or requested by council during the year. We do reference the council administrative reports in project worksheets where applicable. But as you can see here, it really is, again, back to all of our staff, senior staff and all of our support staff that are very actively engaged in this and planning, really in the second half of the year, and of course with our meetings, especially this year following the election, a little further into the new year. With planning, there's extensive information to go through. We'll look at some of our master plans coming up and all of the guidance that goes into preparing this. Approval, we have, we'll see in our next steps that we have bylaws that have formally approved this, but we're also coming back to council during the year in accordance with some of our other policies to through tender awards at times, make amendments and adjustments to our budgets. Executing is really the work of putting all of these capital plans into action, and we do have council's continued involvement, public process involvement at times in different ways with these projects, and then evaluating all of our capital asset inventory through our finance staff is capitalized, it's subject to audit, we're reporting to council, and so there really is a year-round type exercise. Just high level, our assets have a value of just over $407 million. That's looking backwards with what we've paid in the past for our assets. Looking forward, we know from our 2019 asset management plan that just our core infrastructure assets, which is roads, bridges, storms, water and wastewater, have over $1 billion in estimated replacement. And of course, that's over 3-4 years grown considerably. And just to note there, proposals prioritize considering a number of factors as you would expect. We want to be efficient in our delivery of the capital program, so we're leveraging grants and contributions, and sometimes you'll see projects that may get accelerated or even enter a design phase just so that we know they're ready and able to take advantage of other grant programs. We're looking to minimize life cycle maintenance and risk with our projects and our assets. Modernization, and that's a theme we'll see this year and coming up with the other budgets as well. And just a few other things that are priorities when we're considering all of our program. And particularly with this being the first budget for a few of you, I just did want to highlight some of the policies that are our guardrails for our budget. The budget policy, of course, itself, it was recently amended following our procurement policy update. The reserve policy, we've been able, as Chris said, to have a strong footing using our reserves and to have a very strong foundation. And so that reserve policy, as recently as a couple of weeks ago, we were also removing a few reserves where they're no longer needed or less efficient, and also adding when we want to begin tracking over the longer term some funding, for example, with the climate change reserve. Our asset management policy we'll speak about, and so on. And then a little bit more on the reporting. So, we bring forward the capital projects at this point in the year. However, twice a year, we're bringing forward a capital variance or a capital closeout report. And these are all hyperlinked if you were to be interested in going back and seeing any of these. But both in the spring and the fall, we do bring all projects that are at substantial completion and ready to be capitalized. And it allows us to return unused funds or surplus funds to reserves or to other sources of funding. So in 2022, we closed 51 projects and we returned $2.8 million to reserves. Our second quarter variance report, Appendix 2, comments on the status of all projects, regardless if they're ready to close out or not at a point in time. And so council can see in advance of the capital budget process where things are from past approvals. And then as well, in 2022, as I mentioned, with budget adjustments or amendments, we brought forward or required $4.7 million in additional funding needed for projects through the award process. That is exceptional compared to most years, especially in the environment we're in right now. So just a section here on asset management plan. We do, Infrastructure Services does bring forward annual updates to give council a great deal of information, good information on where we are at with that. But just, it does integrate and feed a lot into this presentation, so we just wanted to capture some of the high-level things for that. The plan was approved in 2019, so some of the information, we were fortunate to have that approved in advance of the requirements by the province, but and we plan on updating it every 5 years, but of course at this point it is a few years old, so not that we're not doing anything in the interim. There's a lot of work to update conditions, assessments, and to be reevaluating all of our asset needs every year. I mentioned there's the requirement for provincial reporting and plans, and some of that affects our ability to be eligible for grants as well. And then just the bottom section there, the financial strategy that relates to the asset management plan. We have current base reserve transfers that were already approved in the prior budget, in the 22 budget, of $12.8 million. So a significant portion of our annual levy and our water and wastewater budgets contribute, regardless of our capital spend in any given year, to the reserves of those capital assets. This year, as you may expect, the amount that we've said we would increase it as an inflationary measure is quite large. That $948,000, it was identified already back in the October planning report, but that's using the CPI rate of 7.6%. That was year over year from this last July. So that's being proposed within our levy and our rate budgets, but certainly that's helping to fund our capital budget. And then we have our reserve policy and targets that continue on into the future. So this is a slide we did present last year. The right half has been updated, and the good news there is that the wastewater and stormwater component, they were previously marked low or graded low in terms of confidence and performance data, so those are now medium. We're spending a considerable effort to get better condition assessment data for particularly our stormwater, but in all areas, that's some effort we're putting forward. So as that confidence grows, the better we'll be able to make sure that our infrastructure gap is addressed, and we have strategies to deal with that. So there's an overview for each of the core infrastructure asset categories that have been set forward to the province with our current asset management plan submission. So for example, roads, we have 421 kilometers of roads that are expected biannually using a PCI or pavement condition index. At this point, from information in 2022, our rating is 73 or good. The target level of service, I think was previously approved at 80. That's an example of an area where, based on the shorter and longer term costs of these projects, something we may and should reconsider regularly to see if that is affordable, attainable, and what that number might look like. Our forecast spend, including our sidewalk projects for our roads category, is $48.5 million over the full term of this budget. So that's the budget and the 10-year forecasts. We're currently funding it into our reserves with $3.48 million per year, and this component has replacement value of $384 million. So I won't go through all of these in detail. They are there for you to look at later and have a good sense of where our assets are and how we're managing them. Some of them have some different ways of being rated and scored, and the different targets as level of service. You can see all the forecast spend for all of them. So, and hopefully those graphs as well show the different varying nature of where we're at within the grading related to each of these categories. Sanitary sewer, we would have a score of a good rating of 73%, and our water, this is when it's a bit more unique, but when we brought forward the asset management plan, our level of service target is to be under 39 breaks per year, or water main breaks. We are in good, as you can see from that graph there with the larger green portion. Between the excellent and the good, we're at 88%. So a very good condition there and good funding related to that. And then bridges and culverts. This is another one where biannually we're inspecting and rating our assets to see what the scoring is in relation to our target level of service. Some more links here, and just an example of some of the recent master plans and assessments that have come forward to council that you would have seen, but just to list some of them here and get a sense of some of what is, again, guiding this program. Bridges and culverts and roads, as I mentioned, those are biannual. We did leverage some provincial funding and did a corporate software review. And that's guiding some of what's in tonight's capital budget. Fire brought forward a master plan in 2021, and some other areas there are really foundational to what's in tonight's study or budget. The 2018 DC study was approved in 2019. We'll talk about that, as you're well aware, under our risks section with some provincial legislation. But that really does guide much of and fund much of our new or growth related assets. So this year's capital budget total request is 58 projects totaling $26.6 million. For context, it's last year's was approximately $23 million. And again, it did increase by that $4.7 million. So around where we ended up for 22 in terms of general size. And you can see the breakdown by type there to give you a sense of what's driving some of these areas. As we'd expect, especially with the province's core infrastructure focus, it is our transportation, public transportation assets with roads, bridges, sidewalk, and our storms and drain. That would be the largest one of those. And then you can see the percentages of each of the other ones. And just note the levy supported assets is 79%, and the rate supported, so the water and wastewater, are 21%. So they're both being funded by separate operating budgets. And as we'd expect, the largest of what we're doing is our existing assets. So of the 26.6, 20.7 million, or 78%, is for our existing assets. The largest one there being a project totaling $4.5 million for the Point Abano Road South works. And you can see some of the other those are the largest projects in order of this plan for the existing assets. Our road resurfacing, we did set aside some funds from our 2021 surplus to expand that. And so we've been very fortunate to have our road resurfacing program spend be considerably higher over the last few years, thanks to some strategic effort to increase that. And I think we've really seen some of the changes in our PCI related to that. And then new assets or growth assets, sometimes some of these, like the Thunder Bay and King Street upgrade, though they're components of those projects that are new. They may also have existing, so we may be doing new storm works on a road upgrade, things like that. But the largest one there is the Douglas Park Revitalization Project of $2.3 million. And then the financing side, of the 26.6 million, you can see that we do rely heavily on our reserves, that's 62%. Development charges at 8%. The Canada Community Building Fund, which is previously the federal gas tax of 6%. Debentures of 8%. We'll talk more about where we are at with our town debt, but that's a healthy, good tool for us to be using at this time. And grants as well, which we'll show more detail later. Just a high-level view of where our reserves are. We have available balances going into 2023 of approximately 27 million. And again, the annual contribution is 12.8. And we've already discussed the inflationary amounts, but the future forecasts don't rely on those until they're approved. So we have grown considerably with those annual contributions, really, which is the key aspect to the council's effort to address our infrastructure gap. If you look at the top total line, you can see that over the last 5 years, we've grown from 2018 contributions of just over $10 million per year to the proposed in this year of around $14 million a year. So significant increase in effort to give a stable foundation to what the town is doing, and it's broken down for each of the core and non-core areas there. So that's what we're giving annually. In terms of what we're projecting to have balances over the full 11 years of the budget are these numbers. So again, you can see it broken down for both the levy budgets, core and non-core, and then the water and wastewater budgets. And this isn't unique to Fort Erie, but particularly in the water and wastewater, you can see there's large demand and usage of our reserves over the full forecast to the extent that come the end of 2033. At this point, we know there's large demand, and those are showing a decline near the end there. We would expect to, with our plan to try and also maintain some balances so that year over year we're able to get going on our capital programs in advance of our levy budget, which is what we're doing tonight as well. So for debt, we previously approved in prior budgets, and this is table 3 of the admin report in the 2023 column, because we only issued debt following the full completion of the project. So we have the fire station number 4 that we had approved as a 10-year debt that with the final, that is obviously in use now, as council knows, and has been closed. So we're ready to issue debt for that in 2023. That's $3.9 million. So we will, in our operating budget, have $80,000 in interest for this year, and then principal payments begin thereafter. So the other one there that was previously approved, we brought forward report IS 17 in 2022 for the increase in award cost for the Bridgeburg District Streetscape project. That's a 15-year term, and related payments for that. That's for $3.2 million. That project leveraged federal funding as well, and that's something that's very much in progress right now. Our 22 year-end balance for total debt is $3.9 million, and we have principal payments that you'll see in our operating budget of $856,000 and interest payments of $262,000, which includes the next slide, proposed debt. So 2 items there. The Waverly, well, the first one is more of a note to that the Waverly Beach Trail reconstruction was previously approved with debt. However, with the MDRA funding that we were successful in receiving, we are able to remove that with the eligibility of funding for that. The Point Abino Road South reinstatement, that's that large $4.5 million project we saw in previous slides. That still requires a level of debt due to the amount of work there and some of the ineligible costs for resilience on that road, such that we're still expecting to require $2.08 million and over a 20-year term. The annual repayment limit, excuse me, this is a metric used in Ontario for municipalities. It sets the amount of debt that the municipality is able, or it caps the amount really that we're able to incur in debt costs in any given year. We're currently at 1.76% in our last financial information return. 2022, we're projecting the ending the year just at 1.7. So we will start to see that go up with the debt shown above, with 2023 going up to 1.9%. And to a high with all of this debt proposed of 2.8%. Knowing, however, the context that, in the province that can be as high as 25%. Some others do set internal limitations of 10%, 15% at times. You can easily find information on our comparators or others in Niagara to see where others are at, but 10 and 12% are not uncommon or higher for some. So show you that graphically this is the debt year-end balances. So you can see in 2022 that $3.9 million I just mentioned, and you'll see it go up there, and of course come down over those years. And then some other financing beyond debt. So again, the Canada Community Building Fund, we're using $1.7 million in our budget this year. We will receive $1.02 million. And that's base funding that we expect year to year from the federal government. In this case, we're using more than what we receive because the timing of that is such that we're not always using in any given year everything we receive. And that's being put towards the road resurfacing program and, excuse the typo there, but $1 million for the bridges and culvert replacement program. DCs are being proposed at $2.09 million. For 9 different projects, including $771,000 for the Thunder Bay Road upgrade. And then grants is unusually high this year, but that does include 2 primary major things there. That's $1.78 million for OSIF, which is the Ontario Community and Infrastructure Fund. That's an estimate at this point. Municipalities have not yet received their actual allocation for 23, but that's based on a guaranteed level of 85% of the prior year. We're hoping for that to be higher, but at this point, we're proposing that amount for a few different projects. And then the $2 million is amounts that are additionally being put forward from the MDRA funding for Point Dubanow and as well for some storm works. So over the 11 years, the 23 and then the 10 years that follow, this shows the change in the capital program by year, so definitely some fluctuations. The average over that term for the full 11 years is $18.1 million. We bring forward the capital early in the year for some of the benefits it has with tendering and so on, but we split it into 2 components. Preliminary is those items that we're ready to approve and bring forward for bylaw as early as this coming Monday, December 12th, where we have full existing capital reserves and funding sources to allow those to happen. And then the general approval, we match that up with the operating budget once that is approved in February, and that totals $15.5 million. And those are the 2 different appendices you'll see with tonight's CBC 01 2023 budget report. So risks, these are important conversations, and a lot of them are very common to hear in the news these days. Inflation naturally is volatile and high. Inflation, the 7.6% I referenced earlier from July of 2022, it's not a great index when it comes to construction costs. Certainly capital construction costs are much higher than CPI. So the construction indices that are often used in Ontario would have been 22% last year for the 22 budget and 26% for this year. So as you can see, those combine to be large gaps that we're not proposing to be funded. and the reliability of those percentages, certainly we have a lot of examples from recent approvals that would show that there are larger increases occurring right now. But we know that there are going to be impacts to that we'll need to track and address in future years. Climate change, as you know, just even from the reserve we've established, there's a number of long-term risks. The best study I came across was some impacts estimated by the Financial Accountability Office of Ontario, which said, and this was a focus on public transportation infrastructure, so again, our roads and bridges, but that impact could be anywhere from 17 to 32%. So I was going to maybe show this graphically, but if you take some of the inflation gaps that we're seeing up above and looking at some of the climate change gaps that are potentially there as well, you can see how we've done a lot of work to be ahead of the curve and to have our infrastructure gap funded, but we're losing ground. So these are going to need to be medium and longer term strategies again, and particularly as our next asset management plan comes forward, we'll have to rethink what that looks like. Operating budget impacts, those are identified in Appendix 3 of the report. They total $179,000 both for the levy and for the water wastewater. On the levy side, it does result in a 0.6% increase to the levy. So just know that by approving projects tonight, and you can see them by project ID in Appendix 3, that by doing so, we're approving 0.6% of increases to the levy. Far and away, the largest one for tonight is the Douglas Park revitalization, which not only has some operating impacts, but also the amortization that we say we fund when we bring on these new assets. Legislation I referred to earlier, as we're familiar with Bill 23 and the report that PDS brought forward a couple weeks ago regarding a number of impacts there to the two municipalities in Ontario. A large one in consideration for tonight is our development charge impacts. We have not yet estimated that total impact, but not only development charges, but parkland as well. We know through the new mandatory exemptions and some new definitions, we know for future studies, there'll be mandatory phasing in of the rates that will significantly impact our amounts. So there's a number of changes and impacts for us as a municipality, and in doing so, if to the extent that our DCs are impacted, the other funding sources have to be used if we're to continue with sustaining our assets and our plan. So that is an impact to the levy as well. The asset management plan we've talked about, but certainly as we refine that, even with the first 2 points there with inflation and climate change, and as we have better information, the risk is there that our conditions will be worse than we maybe anticipated. Could also be an opportunity where we find things are perhaps better. It depends if your glass is half full or half empty at this point. But there are some risks associated with that every time we review those assets. And then again, particularly last year, we noted this with the unusual or extraordinary events. It seems to be that the risks with these types of issues we've had here locally with windstorms and flooding, the need you'll see in this budget with increased resiliency, these are real risks and issues that we need to address. And then opportunities. So we have a grants oversight team here at Town Hall that coordinates looking at every available funding opportunity that we can look at together. The CSO there, that's the Regional Program for Combined Sewer Overflow. There's some grants related to that. And some of these programs change from year to year. I know the region has had a plan to review the level of funding with their grants as well. So we only budget for grant funding when it's reasonably assured. So there's a number of projects that may become eligible for an application-based grant. We will certainly pursue any and all of those, but we will only include in the budget those that are reasonably assured, such as the OSIF formula-based amount that we showed earlier of $1.78 million. Modernization certainly is an opportunity, particularly as we've brought forward the corporate software study, we've brought forward other studies, and the modernization funding of the province has kickstarted some of that, but we've identified a number of key areas that are going to be very exciting for staff and hopefully our customers as well, as we find ways to be more efficient, to leverage our new website and make sure that we have more self-serve and e-payment options, and just providing better information that's more readily available to our staff and to yourselves. So there's a project for the finance ERP that we've noted in the past that will be in the package for tonight. Opportunity is debt, so debt again is a great tool, but our low reliance on debt is an opportunity for us to use that when we need to. For example, the Bridgeburg District project, where we have available capacity for for a project that was not forecasted, so we could move on that because we had low debt. Operating impacts conversely can be an opportunity, and to the extent that we're realizing better efficiencies in some areas. Condition data, we touched on briefly already. And then even with the budget itself, I would just note that it's an opportunity, particularly with the new council, and as you consider strategic elements of everything we do, whether or not, in coordination with our communication staff and with our IT staff, if we can find ways of expanding the resources we have and bring on new resources to enhance the engagement we have with our budget process. So this is kind of a summary slide, key messages for the budget. The total is $26.6 million, and the total 11-year horizon in today's dollars is $199 million. It's funded primarily through our capital reserves from our operating budgets. The capital funding, the 2019 asset management plan gap was closed in last year's budget. But of course, there are other risks associated with that as the needs are reviewed and refined. And of course, the gap has widened due to extraordinary inflationary challenges, of which we hope will, as we look to forecast, will settle and will normalize again. And then the operating budget impacts to note of 0.6% in the future years, particularly as debt comes online and other things, it will increase to 1.5% in '24 and 1.8% in '25. Next steps are the dates provided here for bylaw approval for the capital budget and user fees. You do also have report CBC 02 tonight for our user fees with an appendix of changes proposed for those. Most of the fees are proposed to be increased in accordance with CPI. It's in a slightly different CPI in terms of the timing that was approved for that, but that one is 6.7%. Of note, we are making two suggested changes to that. One is that the business licenses be waived again for 2023, and the other is that based on the operational model of our arenas, that and to the extent that we will have a priority to try and maximize or optimize health in our community, we do realize that there's elements of supply and demand with our rate setting exercise there, so we are proposing a more modest 2% increase to those fees instead of the 6.7%. So the water and wastewater budgets, we're proposing that for January 18th. The regional water and wastewater rate budget presentation, I believe, is January 19th. So we will have most of their information, which is key to what we present on the 18th. And then the general levy budget on February 15th and February 22nd, if necessary, with bylaws to follow. And that's it for the presentation. I would turn it back to Councillor McDermott as chair. If there's any questions on the presentation. Following that, we do have the link in the e-agenda for all the capital worksheets that we would move through in order. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Are there any comments or questions for the presentation?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Jansen, for that inspirational presentation. What if you could go to slide number 7? This is slide 7 to, I think, 10 or 11. You talk about the asset management, the various categories, and you've got within those forecast spend over a 10-year period and the current financing per year. And in each of these categories, the current financing is significantly less than the amount of money required in order to meet the forecast spend. So that suggests to me that as we're going through the 10-year period, we're going to have to be increasing the current financing on an annual basis.
Yeah, so a couple things there. I mean, we would have some opening existing balances, but there are also some, that's our town current financing. So in the case, for example, of roads, we're also applying $700,000 of federal gas tax towards this year's budget. So there are other elements we'll take advantage of as well to include with that. But you're right, that as we look down the road 10 years, we know that there's, particularly with the level of service target of 80, there's challenges in the long term with that level of funding still.
So the current, if I might, Chair, the current financing line really relates to what the town is putting in through its levy or reserves.
That's right, yes.
Thank you. I had another question, and that was with respect to slide 14. And for the financial ERP system replacement, it's under the category of existing assets, which means that this is being paid for through the levy or reserves, but not development charges.
That's right.
My question is, wouldn't the need for a new system, financial ERP system, wouldn't some of that relate to the fact that the community is growing?
You're quite right. It's an existing asset. It wasn't an item that was identified in our DC study, and it is more restrictive. I know even just studies as a category itself are being removed with Bill 23. But it is, in theory, even though we're trying to enhance and grow, have a better system, we deem it to be an existing asset.
Okay, and as I understand it, unless a project is identified in the development charges study, then you can't draw money from the development charges reserve in order to fund even a portion of it.
Right. I mean, there is some latitude in the legislation to substitute like projects, but generally, yeah, in this case, if that type of system wasn't identified, we wouldn't be eligible.
Okay. If I might share, the next question had to do with the philosophy about whether you utilize reserves or you borrow money. And we're in an inflationary time, so I don't know, excuse me, what we would be paying in terms of the debt, what the interest rate would be. I presume that we would be seeking a fixed rate so that we would know throughout what the rate is. But what is the rationale, or why is the thinking that rather than utilizing our reserves, we should borrow some money because we've got virtually no debt? And I presume some of that has to do with our desire to make sure we've got money available to meet our asset management obligations.
Yeah, you're right. And actually, I did include a paragraph in the report. I was just looking it up here. It's in the middle of page 5 of 9 of the report to talk about that option. Yeah, in this case, for example, I think the 10-year rate or was the 20-year rate would be even still, I think, in the high 4% from Infrastructure Ontario that we were using as the basis for these. But even when you compare that to current GIC rates and some of the other investment or those similar term rates, there's not necessarily a gain to be had by investing externally, but certainly that's the primary offset for us, whether we borrow against externally we borrow or whether we use some of our capital reserves. So we have looked at that in the past and included some comments on that in the report.
Okay. And then finally, if I might, Chair, if you turn to slide 23, please. So in terms of MDRA, my understanding is that we're utilizing, I think you made reference to Point Abano Road and the waterfront, there were some projects dealing with
storm
the
projects, yep.
Shoreline protection. But it doesn't make reference to the Waverly Beach Trail, which is going to be funded from MDRA, the MDRA grant, is it not?
Yeah, and that one, if We did note that that was the one that had debt removed and MDRA funding was added at one point during the year. I don't want to fly around here too much, but I think it's this slide where item 1 would show, and that did come forward early this year, so it's not part of the budget at this point because we've already made that budget amendment to, when it comes to financing that Waverly Beach Trail, we were able to remove all of the debt associated with that and use MDRA funding.
Okay, thank you. So I just have one other question then to follow this. Because of the escalation of costs and because of the need to ensure that we've got adequate shoreline protection or not, depending on the route utilized for reconstruction, if we required more money, that would necessitate a budget amendment in 2023 if we were going to proceed with construction?
Yes, so with the existing Point Abino Road project,
No.
or sorry, with Waverly. Yeah, I mean, Director Walsh can speak to that in terms of how the design of that the resilience is, to what extent resilience is included at this point in that estimate.
So speaking of the funding on the Waverly Trail, I'm confident that the envelope we have right now should be sufficient for our needs, regardless of which course we take. The estimates that were provided to the government when we applied for the funding, at their direction, had a healthy contingency in it.
So my understanding, if I might share, is that shoreline protection is outside of, like additional shoreline protection is outside of what the MDRA funding could be used for. So my question is, if we required additional shoreline protection, although I presume that there's something in our budget already, that would necessitate a change in the 2023 budget, would it not?
Again, the budget we put forward, we're hoping it covers it.
Okay,
We think we're okay.
but if it doesn't, budget amendment,
Yes,
correct?
Yes.
yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair.
Any further questions of the presentation? Okay, then could I get a mover for report CBC 01 2023? Thank you, Councillor Dubanow. And we'll go through the list one by one.
Through the town's website. So. Bad computer. Oh my goodness. What's it being hit? F-O. Something wrong with it. All right, I'm just going to go through our, if I want to access the agenda here, and this is maybe helpful for people to see, if we go through our agendas and minutes. And then we go through tonight's agenda. So here's a link to the report, CBC 01. These are all the worksheets. This is report CBC 02 down below. So if we click on that, we will be able to now follow through all of the projects. Let me go full screen. Does F11 still work? There we go. Okay, so beginning in section, this is, the current section with the table of contents here is all the capital requests. There's a summary on page 1 to 3, but then beginning on page 4 is the listing of projects that we'll go through together. It's beginning here with item copy 23.
Thank you, Jonathan. Any comments or questions with regard to a photocopier replacement for $16,000? Moving on. Any questions on this item, FS 0522 financial ERP system replacement? Seeing none, move along. And IT computer hardware for $107,000 replacement.
This is not that.
Moving on.
Well, whatever you can hit it up there and then do page down.
Smart.
Any questions on MSQL3, MSQL server? Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, very brief question, Mr. Chair, and perhaps Mr. Jansen or even Mr. Davis can access this. I noticed that this is a Microsoft product, and I'm just wondering if this is part of a plan to migrate us to Microsoft systems over the long term, or is this just necessary for the software that we're going to be utilizing?
Okay. Through you, Mayor, to the councillor. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's something that Mr. McQueen and Mr. Jansen and the directors, we've spoken about this as part of a modernization project over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. This is kind of the first step in that. There are some software that we're looking at right now that require this, but it's expandable to those other things that we're looking at down the road. Okay.
Okay, moving on to a phone replacement for $20,600. Next one. Server and core infrastructure replacement for $35,000. No comments. Town hall switches replacement, $25,000. Waterfront land acquisition, $635,000. Moving on. Waterfront, oh, I'm sorry, Conley Field playground replacement. Or you moved too quick on me, Jonathan. Any comments on that one? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor. McDermott, I'm just wondering, because there's more playgrounds coming up too. I know that these have been looked at. I wouldn't mind at some point seeing what the problem with the existing ones are. Like, I know it's kind of, one of my concerns is sometimes that some of the playgrounds look like they're not in, parts of the playground do not look like they're in horrible shape, but yet we take everything out and we replace everything. I wouldn't mind having an opportunity of looking at I know it was rated, where the deficiencies were and why we're replacing it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Noyes, our Parks and Facilities staff they are trained to perform, and they perform annually an inspection on all of our playgrounds. We estimate a life cycle of approximately 15 years for our playgrounds. When the playgrounds start to approach that age, our staff do go out and perform inspections. We can certainly make available to Councillor Noyes those inspection reports. I also have detailed photographs of these playgrounds, which cannot be provided in this budget format, but both playgrounds are starting to experience quite a bit of rusting, quite a bit of structural issues. Ropes are starting to wear, so we really judge if we're to replace all these small parts and some of the structural issues and how long that will last. We look at that as compared to replacement cost. So to answer your question directly, we will have inspection reports that can be provided.
I would appreciate that because I'm thinking sometimes there may be some of the playgrounds that we can retain that are still in good shape. Like, I mean, there's certain pieces of equipment I understand would be more expensive to fix than replace, but I'm just wondering if it has to always be an all or nothing type thing, if there's parts of it that we can maintain, if it's still in good working order and and it's not going to cost us more to maintain it than replace it, but sometimes I wonder where these playgrounds, some parts of it still look like they're quite usable and has some life left to it. And if we're thinking about economy, but also just the environment, we should try to, reuse or not replace if they don't necessarily need it.
Just to add to that, some of our older playgrounds don't meet current AODA standards as well. So that's another consideration in determining whether a playground should be replaced or whether it can be fixed.
And just further to that, Councillor McDermott, I'm not really trying to question, I'm just trying to get a better understanding on some of these playgrounds, if everything has to be replaced, if it's always an all or nothing. And I did have an opportunity of talking very briefly with Sydney earlier today about, actually earlier tonight about AC Douglas. In the year 2024, that park will be 20 years old, and it was examined in September, and it's still in pretty good working order, and I guess it's going to be looked at for the 2024 what needs to be replaced, or doesn't need to be replaced. But that's one example of a park that's lasted at least 20 years and is still in good working condition. That's all. Thank you.
Any further? Okay, we'll move on to the next one, which is the Douglas Park revitalization. Comments or questions? Okay, move on to the next. The neighborhood park enhancements, $40,000. Moving on. The Fort Erie Tennis Club courts replacement. Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I had the opportunity to speak to Mr. Jansen earlier today about this item. I had some concerns about, with it being a club with members, that the municipality would provide funding for a court replacement. And I was very reassured by the answers that I received from staff regarding, access, or sorry, not access, that's the wrong word, potential agreements in the future in return for this. They gave me the assurances that this is something they're looking into. So I'm satisfied. I'm going to support this, and I appreciate the information Mr. Jansen provided me earlier today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Noyes.
On the same item, this came up at Monday night's meeting, that we were also waiting for more information before we would necessarily approve this, or what conditions of the lease and everything else. We wanted more information. I don't know, I guess we can leave it in the budget and then take it out later if the answers or the information we're getting is different. But that was discussed on Monday night, that we wanted more information before we would kind of move ahead.
Your Worship.
That was the land committee discussion with respect to this and what the public's access is to these facilities. It's not just this particular court, but as you know, there's a need for pickleball courts in Fort Erie. So putting this in the budget, at least we've created the financial envelope for this court to be created. It is needed. The issue really is, what's the extent of access by the public? And there's not a problem with an organization operating one of the facilities that we own. We've got a number of facilities in town. The question is, how does the public get access? So I'm sure that will be resolved.
Thank you. Moving forward. The Godbridge Street Park Playground replacement, $150,000. Moving on. Park parking lot resurfacing, $100,000. Moving on. Oh, Go ahead, Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, I noticed here that it mentioned the ages range from 20 to 40 years. I'm just curious which one is at the 40-year, and that seems like a parking lot that had a good long life, and I'm just curious which one it was.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Dubanow, I would suspect that would be Oaks Park,
Thank you very much.
with the oldest facility.
Your worship.
Yeah, Chair, if I could ask, if there's money available, would parking lot improvements include Centralia? Because there's a very, very poor parking area. It's not even, I don't even know if there's adequate stone there, but perhaps that's something that Public Works can take a look at, and in the event there is excess funds, there could be some type of meaningful parking area put in there as well.
Ms. Hanson?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor, yes, that can be assessed if there's extra funds available.
Thank you.
Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councilor McDermott. I know over the last council, we were talking a little bit about environmental and climate, things that we can do to improve things. And one of the big things is always parking lots, and that there's new kinds of pavement and everything else that's much more climate friendly or environmentally friendly. And I'm wondering if that's been taken into consideration at all. I know there's a different type of pavement out there that's more porous or whatever. The water can infiltrate it better. It doesn't kind of sit on top of the pavement. And I would imagine this was not taken into consideration now, but I'm wondering if we could kind of keep it in, maybe look at it to see, would it make sense when we're replacing parking lots or whatever to kind of look at the opportunity of being more climate friendly?
Ms. Hanson?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Noyes, the funding associated with this request is primarily for repairs, so you're correct that we wouldn't be replacing parking lots and looking at the green infrastructure type of parking lot that you're referencing, but it certainly could be considered in future parking lots, such as it's something we could look at for Douglas Park, for instance.
Anything further?
No, nothing further. Thank you very much.
If I may, just one question, Ms. Hanson, with regards to this parking lot. The washrooms in the former concession area, are you keeping that or are you tearing that down?
To you, Mr. Chair, I'm not aware that the washrooms would be removed, certainly not as part of this project, but I could follow up with Mr. Hutton to confirm that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. The Ridgeway Battlefield Park washroom enclosure for $20,000. Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councilor McDermott. I guess my first thing, this is ugly. And I mean, surely we can come up with bushes or hedges or something like that that would better hide a porta potty than a $20,000. I don't even know what to call it. Structure or whatever, enclosure. To me, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you could put some nice fencing up, you could put nice bushes up, you could put something, but to put this thing around a porta potty, I mean, it's still a porta potty, and the rationale being, I'm not saying that it's not an important historical site. That's not where I'm going with this, but there was a question about people. It showed us up in people's pictures. Well, with Photoshop now, you can take it out of any picture. And the other thing is, if you don't want it in your picture, don't have it in your picture. Change your approach. But to spend $20,000 to try to hide a porta potty, which actually I don't think will hide it at all, and just to me it's ugly. And I would think there's much better ways of disguising or making it less obtrusive than what this suggestion is.
Ms. Hanson, is there, to Councillor Noyes' question, is there any other designs that come around that price that we could be looking at that might be a little bit better looking?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Noyes, this is a request of Museum Services, as noted. I'm certainly willing to go back to Museum Services and look at different options, whether it be a custom constructed enclosure. This is obviously one that we could order and have installed fairly easily. But I'm certainly willing to chat further with Museum Services about whether they'd be satisfied with,
Thank you.
sorry.
Mr. McQueen, did you want to chime in on this one?
Thank you. Yeah, through the chair. The other reason why this structure was considered is in lieu of sort of vegetation and other planting. I think there's some elements around wind and other environmental conditions on the site, and they were really trying to find something that was designed specifically to protect that, notwithstanding that it has a bit of an institutional look about it. But the idea was to put something in that was resilient enough for some other purposes other than sort of blocking the poor aesthetics of a porta potty. So, but to Ms. Hansen's comment, we can certainly take that back to museum staff and see if some other options may have been explored that might provide the same level of protection that could be considered.
Back to Councillor Noyes.
Again, and I can appreciate, am I the only one who thinks this is really ugly? Like,
Well, I'm going to ask.
yeah.
Is there anyone else? Councillor Lewis.
I'm actually not going to speak to aesthetics, but I did have a couple of questions when Councillor Noyes is finished.
Okay.
I'm fine.
Again, I'm hoping vegetation or something more natural looking. But the other thing I'm concerned about is that when you try to hide something with something that's bigger, I don't think you're improving the situation. On top of that, I'm worried about vandalism and everything else. Like I just don't see this as I see this as a problem that we're going to be creating. That's all.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship, to the chair. And I noticed our CAO used the word "in lieu of" when discussing toilets at the museum site. But just a couple of questions, not going quite as far as Councillor Noyes with the aesthetics. But were other locations for the porta potties, I guess, explored before seeing if an expenditure like this was needed? And then the other question I had, I believe this is a museum site that is not open in terms of being a museum site, but it is in terms of being an open park. But I'm just a bit, if we could get clarification on, is it an open museum site or is it solely just a park?
Ms. Hansen.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Lewis, it is the building itself is not open to the public. However, there are a number of interpretive panels throughout the site, near the parking lot, actually on the building on site, and within the pavilion as well. So it is an interactive site, a number of different plaques and displays throughout the site. And in terms of other locations considered, I do believe the porta potty right now sits at the front of the park, and there was a desire to relocate it behind the building and the pavilion on the east side of the property, so that it was not as visible as it is right now, sitting right at the parking lot and the driveway.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the answer, Ms. Hansen.
Councillor Noyes.
Now hearing that it may be moved, would there be even any point to trying to make it, if it's going to be behind the building, it's not going to be visible from the road. Would there be any reason to expend $20,000 to make it more aesthetic when you're not even going to see it from the road?
Ms. Hansen.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Noyes, it still will be visible from the road. It will be visible as you drive by and as you drive up the driveway. It just will not be sitting right on the roadway through the park. So the concern was that it will remain visible. I think part of the design was also in consideration that the pavilion on site is of a similar metal structure with a metal roof, and that this might be compatible with that.
I have nothing further.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you. And last comment, just in the report that I meant to mention, I can appreciate the comments on aesthetics in photos, but this museum site is also a heritage building that was replaced with vinyl siding that also doesn't articulate the look of an 1812 site. So I would agree with Councillor Noyes. I have a little bit of hesitation spending this kind of money on something that may be easily solved by just moving to a different location.
Okay, so that being said, do we want to have a vote to take this off? Somebody want to move that? Councillor Noyes? So, any comments or questions? Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to support this on the sort of the well, I'm going to support it knowing that staff have received the input from council tonight, and that hopefully they can go back, have the discussion, bring those concerns to museum services, and if there is something we can do that's more fitting on the property, I'm confident that we can do that. You know, when it comes to aesthetics, you know, beauty is always in the eye of the beholder. We dealt with a zoning matter on Monday night, and it also included some renderings of a proposed building. Just because I'm not fond of that design, there might be individuals who absolutely love it. So I try to steer clear of those points. The cost and the necessity, I'm sure that, and other ways we can achieve it, I'm sure that's something staff can do and look into, and we'll go back before we actually make this expenditure. But I'm confident leaving it on the budget, knowing that staff can take that input and move forward with it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Your Worship?
Yeah, I've got a similar view of this. We're talking about a National Historic Site, and I suppose we could go without a porta potty, period, but the reality is people are coming to visit this site. Not a lot of people, certainly not enough people to justify us contemplating putting in a real washroom, but staff has heard the discussion. Presumably there will be dialogue with the museum board. If it's not necessary because of the relocation, that's great, we'll save $20,000, but if it's still visible, and if the museum board still feels it'd be appropriate, I don't think we should be concerned about what the thing looks like, because we could all have a different view of what the covering should be. We've got staff that can work with the museum board on this, put in something that at least is reflective of the site. I get that the old building wasn't properly clad, but you know, I'm going to support keeping this in the budget, because I'm going to leave it to staff to sort this out, come up with the best solution for what is a National Historic Site.
Thank you, Worship. So, all in favor of keeping it in?
That wasn't the motion.
I'm
The motion
sorry.
was to take it out.
All in favor of taking it out? All in favor of keeping it in? So we'll move on to the next item, which is the Lion Sugar Bowl Park Pavilion. Comments or questions? Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate my earlier comments to thank the Fort Erie Lions for their effort and the fundraising. You know, we're very fortunate to have organizations in this community who are willing to and able to contribute funds like this to projects. You know, we have a history of doing that in our community, and it's always nice to see this. You know, certainly the financial pressures and inflation and construction costs have increased since this was originally envisioned, but I am going to support this because I think it's a worthy addition to Sugar Bowl Park. It's a great organization who put a lot of effort in to do this. They'd like to see it there. They think it's an important addition to the park. And so that's why I'm happily supporting this, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
I just want to echo the same comments. I think this is a welcome addition to that part of the community and a long time in the making, so we'll be supporting.
Further comments?
Well, carry on.
Sorry, I just got on a roll. Yeah. So then we have Sugarbowl Park renewal, $1,000 in construction. Waterfront land acquisition, 320. Auto extraction tool replacement. Bunker gear replacement for $65,000. $40,000 for fire equipment replacement reserve. Nice, and then Councillor Dubanow.
Again, I'm in full support of this. I'm just going to ask the question about this and the one before that, and I think there's one other coming. With our used equipment, when we're replacing it, where do we, it's sent somewhere, right? It's not disposed of, it's sent someplace. And I'm just wanting some information on how we dispose or what happens to the stuff we're replacing.
Through the chair to Councillor Noyes, most of our gear, once it's been taken out of service, lately has been going to the east, so to Newfoundland or provinces that way, as they're well underfunded. And they are excited to take our used equipment.
I was just going to say, I'm happy to hear it's a win-win situation, really. I'm glad to see that it has some purpose that can help someone else. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo Councillor Noyes' sentiment on that. And the reason for my comment, this being the last fire service item, is every year when we have capital budget, we always get these requests for fire equipment, and I always enthusiastically support them because we have a phenomenal fire department. I believe it may be the largest or one of the largest volunteer fire departments in the province. We get phenomenal value for the money that taxpayers spend with our the fire suppression service we have. So when I see requests like this, it's not a concern because I know that we get excellent value for the dollar, and this goes to our new recruits and to equip them. I'm happy to see these items come up. So it was just a quick comment, just kind of goes to what Councillor Noyes said. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chief. Moving on to Albany Street, King Street to Garrison Road, $209,232 per design and $1,185,064 for construction. Comments, questions? Moving on. Bellevue water main replacement. Any questions with regards to that? Your worship?
Yeah, just give me a second here. Having trouble with my I think I'm okay with this one. So I'm fine.
You fine? Okay. We'll move on to the next one.
Go.
King Street upgrade. Your worship.
Yeah, this was the one I had a question on. So in the body of the explanation for the need for the project, it indicates that the storm sewer is funded 75% by growth or DC charges, 25% non-growth. Then if you look at the budget sheets below, it appears that that isn't the actual breakdown. Is there an explanation for that?
Walsh?
Looks like it's reversed. Okay. Okay, thank you.
So we'll move on to the Point Avenue Road South reinstatement of the shoreline protection of road. Comment or questions? Your worship.
So with respect to this, the question that I had is if the province was prepared to allocate $2.5 million with respect to reconstruction, I presume that that was somewhat reflective of costs that had been submitted by the municipality through the application. And yet it looks like the max we're going to be able to utilize based on now on the criteria is 1.67 million. So is there a possibility that more of the MDRA funding can be resorted to as this project unfolds?
Through you, Mr. Chair, with all of our MDA projects, we will be looking to maximize other people's money.
Okay. And the amount of money that comes out of MDRA then would reduce whatever need we would have to borrow money on this project. Thank you.
Yes. Anyone else? Ridgeway Road water main replacement. Comments or questions? Next one. The Thunder Bay Road upgrade. The Walden Boulevard upgrade. Your worship.
Just with respect to the timing of construction, I see that's 2025. In the meantime, there's parts of that road that are quite deteriorated. In the meantime, would there be a possibility of some interim measures to address some of the more deteriorated areas?
Mr. Walsh?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, we can certainly look in that. Maybe if we go in there and take a milling machine and get it down to the concrete structure again, it may create some time for us. This project, when we put together our budgets a couple of years ago, was back-to-back years, and this is one of the projects that had to suffer due to inflation. We couldn't afford to complete the 23 and 24 program with the funding we had allocated.
Right. So when this road is reconstructed, does the concrete come out?
Yes, we'll be taking it right down to the dirt.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? We'll move on to the...
Oh, can I just ask one further question on that project? So if it turns out that we get some favorable tenders on some of the other projects, is there a possibility that this could be moved up? Or not necessarily this one, but if we get favorable tendering on some of these large capital projects, some of the ones that have been deferred could potentially be moved up?
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly. We have a number of projects that are coming to completion in design, and we're forecast for construction shortly. If we do find that, and I suspect we will get favorable prices from the word on the street, I'm all in favor of pushing them forward.
Good. What street is that?
Sorry.
You don't have to reveal your sources.
Thank you. Anything further? And we'll move on to the Wildwood Avenue drainage improvements. On to the next one. The guide rail replacement. On to the next one. Road reconstruction program. Comments or questions? We'll move on to Ridgeway Road and Rebstock Road signal rebuild. Moving on to the road resurfacing program. And to the 2023 bridge and culvert replacement. The next one is a 2024 bridge and culvert replacement. And now on to sidewalk repair program. Your worship?
In terms of the sidewalk repair program, do we have money left over from previous budgets? Because I'm just not sure whether we're spending all the money that we've got available.
Mr. Walsh?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the side year projects, side XX, they get spent almost to the limit, if not over, every year.
So then the surplus of funds might be in new sidewalks? Or do we have surplus in new sidewalks?
The council created a project a few years ago, 2 years ago, John says. I think it was $100,000. He's given me $200,000.
Yep.
We still have that money in reserve. The active transportation master plan identified a number of key sidewalks that frankly we don't have the capacity to undertake right now. Believe it or not, it's a lot easier to get a road built than it is a sidewalk, a new sidewalk in a subdivision. It is on our long-term goals to improve active transportation, but right now we're not taking any action on increasing the network other than through development.
So inability is because we don't have the resources to do the design work, or what's the?
That's correct right now.
So I'm just wondering whether there's a possibility, and this is something that the CAO, I suppose, could be discussing with senior staff about some of the infilling, because there are locations now where we've got sidewalks that have been created because of new development. They end at the end of the development. There's a gap, and then there's more sidewalk. Those areas really should be filled in, I think. If we don't have the resources in-house, then maybe we could contemplate hiring some external sources to assist us with that, because that was something that I heard a fair bit of, and maybe some of you also heard about the need for sidewalks in certain areas. And I think it's wonderful that we're requiring developers to put in the sidewalks, and we're seeing that in a lot of places. But we need to have those links. Otherwise, we've got kids and seniors or people with accessibility issues that have problems getting from one area to the other. So hopefully, Chair, hopefully the CAO, whom I looked at a moment ago, is listening and has picked up on that. Thank you.
Councillor Noyes and then Councillor Dubanow.
Councillor McDermott also saw that the Director of Infrastructure had his hand up, was trying to get your attention.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just for council's information, the active transportation plan brought forward a number of years ago noted $8 million in missing sidewalks in the existing network. So $100,000 or $200,000 is simply a drop in the bucket right now.
Or $300,000, which I think is forecast in future budgets. But it's a step. You know, you have to start someplace, and $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 is better than $0.
Anything further? Councillor Noyes and then Councillor Dubanow.
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. One particular example, and I think I brought this up with Mr. Walsh a while ago, and I don't know if I brought it up with Sydney, is that a good example where I don't think we're talking about a huge expense is on River Trail, and I don't know whether it was just a glitch or whatever, but you have a sidewalk that goes to almost to the new park. And there's a beautiful paved path through the new park, the AC Douglas number 2. Beautiful park, absolutely gorgeous path, but the sidewalk ends like, I think, less than 20 feet before the path. So you have to get off the sidewalk, and it's not accessible. Like, I mean, it's not accessible because you basically have to walk off the curb, walk on the road 20 feet, and then get onto the path to get into the park. To me, that's an expense that is, should be able to be covered with the $100,000 or $200,000 in reserves. That, I think, was just kind of like a glitch. Like, I don't think anybody kind of thought it through. Wait a minute, there's the park, there's the path, we're putting in this side, here's the sidewalk. Like, there should have been. It's unfortunate we didn't make the developer do it, because I think the developer actually worked on that park, but there's like a very small amount, and it would just really increase the access to the park. You have this beautiful park, and you have the sidewalk that ends like 20 feet before the trail. So that would be one area I would consider looking at, that it would be a win-win.
Did you note that, Mr. Walsh? Thank you. Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to touch on what the mayor mentioned earlier, as well as Councillor Noyes, I mean, you've got examples of new subdivisions like Spears Estates, where I happen to live, and the sidewalk ends at Spears Road, and then 400 feet to Garrison Road, there's absolutely no sidewalk at all, and it's a very narrow road. So that's an excellent example of what this reserve could be used for, to connect some of those links. But on that same topic of this reserve, and perhaps this might be going beyond what it was intended, but is there any opportunity during construction projects, when we do road reconstructions, if there are no sidewalks and it's an identified corridor, would this be something that we can draw from for a project that may not have included sidewalks as part of the reconstruction, perhaps to utilize these funds to provide sidewalks? Then we might get some efficiency on costs, may have a contractor who's able to do it at the same time as part of the project. I'm just thinking of ways we can utilize these funds and get a benefit that, there may be some savings by, I hate the word synergy, but, we're kind of getting into that, situation of multiple roads, sidewalks, make sense to do them at the same time. And that's why I'm just throwing that out there, and perhaps Mr. Walsh can comment on that.
Mr. Walsh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Where we have the opportunity, we do include sidewalks in projects. For example, Lakeside was completed in the last year or so. There were no sidewalks there before. Now we have a sidewalk on one side, if not two. Can't recall off the top of my head. But Spears Road in particular is a development charge project. It is slated for upgrade, which includes full urbanization. But I think my point here is where we have the opportunity, we do include it.
May follow up, Mr. Chair. Just going back to the Walden Boulevard reconstruction, is that kind of the idea of something that we can do there, or we, because I mean, there was a recent, someone got struck by a pedestrian was struck there and killed, and I don't think it's related to not being sidewalks. I think it was just a bad night, bad situation. But is this something that, are sidewalks envisioned perhaps as part of that project? Is it something that can be considered, or are we just doing like a replacing kind? I know I'm digressing to something we previously approved, but it kind of ties into this.
Mr. Walsh?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Walden, as I recall, is a full urbanization, which in my mind includes at least one sidewalk.
That is music to my ears. Thank you very much, Mr. Walsh.
Anyone else? And we'll move on to the Point Avenue Road Storm Pumping Station. And on to Erie Beach area storm drainage. The River Trail storm outlet improvement. 1 million $1,000,000 for the River Trail storm outlet improvement. 1 million $1,000,000 for the River Trail storm outlet improvement. 1 million $1,000,000 for the River Trail storm outlet improvement. 1 million $1,000,000 for the River Trail storm outlet improvement. 1 million $1,000,000 for the River Trail storm outlet improvement. 1 million $1,000,000 for the River Trail storm outlet improvement. 1 million $1,000,000 for the River Trail storm outlet improvement. 1 million $1,000,000 for the River Trail storm outlet improvement. 1 million $1,000,000 for the River Trail storm outlet improvement. 1 million $1,000,000 for the River Trail storm outlet improvement. 1 million $1,000,000 for the River Trail storm outlet improvement. 1 million $1,000,000 for the River Trail storm outlet improvement. 1 million $1,0 Storm outlet repairs. Storm sewer repairs. Sanitary sewer flow monitors. The Thunder Bay lateral spot repair. Albany Street water main extension. The Disher Street water main replacement. The infrastructure leak detection hydrants. The water meter replacement program. The E.J. Freeland Center mechanical upgrades. E.J. Freeland Center window and door replacements. The arena spectator netting replacement. Crystal Ridge accessible washrooms. The Gibson Center heater replacement. The Leisureplex refrigeration receiver replacement. The Town Hall building automation system replacement. Crystal Ridge Park Pavilion demo. Okay. The Point Avenue Lighthouse repairs. Ridgeway Memorial Cemetery, new columbarium. The 2023 roads dump plow truck. Questions, comments? I believe that takes us to the end of that, does it not, Jonathan?
It does.
Thank you. So I'll just read the recommendation of this portion of the report. The council approves the 2023 preliminary capital budget of $11,117,146 as per Appendix 1 to report number CBC 01-2023 and directs staff to submit the bylaw for council approval on December 12, 2022. And further, that council defers approval of the balance of the 2023 capital budget of $15,455,689 as per Appendix 2 to report number CBC 01-2023 to February 27, 2023 with consideration of the 2023 general levy budget bylaw, and further, that council approves the exclusion of amortization from the 2023 operating budget as required by Ontario Regulation 284/09. All in favor? Carry. Could I please get a mover for CBC 02-2023, the recommendations of 2023 fees and charges? Councillor Lewis? Excuse me. Do you want to speak to this first, Jonathan? Okay. Are there any comments or questions with regards to the changes in fees, if any? So it'll be your worship, and then Councillor Noyes.
Yeah, just if I could, with respect to Appendix 1, there's a reference to water and wastewater meter, including ground strap, et cetera. And the report, I think, makes reference to the rate of inflation, which is whatever, 6.7%. But this increase would be far more than that. This increase is almost, well, it's 40% anyways. So I'm just wondering what the rationale for that was.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Redekop. This was one where I believe the costing was mistakenly included in last year's, where it's more, I believe, than just an inflationary change. I think we included, I'm looking at the report. It's in the middle of page 4, where the Water Engineering Division isn't changing the 1.5-inch meter with the 1.5-inch Mach 10 E-coder due to increased accuracy. So I think it's that we're possibly using a different meter type here as well. I don't know if infrastructure has any recollection. I can double check as well with Nanette, who's following along.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that if we could just maybe get a response on that. Thank you.
Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. My one question is about the tree contribution. It doubled. I can just be like, when I think, God, how many years ago? Probably 15 years ago? Maybe not that. A long time ago. When we created a lot, we paid, I don't know what it was. We thought it was a lot then. Still no tree. And we've put the money out because every time you create a lot, you have to pay for a tree. And I know the tree can go someplace, but we don't know if the tree's gone anywhere or whether when the lot's ever developed, there's going to be a tree on it. We really don't know. But at that point, I actually called some of the municipalities around to find out what they were charging for a tree. Some of them didn't charge anything, and I think Port Colborne charged 100 or something. I don't know what they're charging now, but 100% increase in the tree. I'd like to kind of know a little bit more, because developers don't pay that, I don't think, don't they? Isn't it kind of part of their thing that they supply the trees in the development? I don't know if the town subcontracts it or what. But I think $1,000 for a tree is a lot of money, and doubling it, I know that labor has gone up, et cetera, but I can probably get the same tree for about $200 and a 2-year guarantee. Granted, I know we're talking about digging a hole and planting it and everything else, but doubling it, I think is a bit, without more explanation of why we've gone from 500 to 1,000. And I would like to know some historical thing. Don't we kind of like if we anticipate we're going to have 1,000 trees, we kind of contract out 1,000 trees. If it's 500, we contract out 500 trees. We're not usually contracting one tree out at a time. We kind of roll them all into one. Has the price doubled?
Sigbey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Noyes. The reason that we collect the fees for trees is primarily for severances or consents. You are correct that when a subdivision is developed, the developer is responsible for installing the trees. The increase is based on the fact that the town actually develops a list and is responsible for tendering out the installation of the trees that we've collected money for. Pre-COVID, those tender prices were coming in $350 to $400 a tree. We also add an administrative fee to cover some staff time to coordinate the tender and installation of the tree. The tender pricing that we're getting right now, so 2021 and 22, deciduous tree prices are coming in $800 to $850. So our cost to tender to install a tendered tree has doubled, I would say, in the last 3 to 4 years. And that's what this increase reflects.
Councillor Noyes?
Again, again, I see the trees that are planted. I can go to a number of places, and it's not going to cost me $800, $850 to buy the tree. Granted, I know there's cost to install it and all that. But what does the developer pay? Do we know what the developer pays for his trees?
Ms. Hanson?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we do not keep track of what the developer, the costs that they are paying to construct a subdivision. We are not involved, I think, in that process of them installing the trees in subdivisions. Really, all that we are involved in is installing trees for money we've collected through the severances, as I mentioned. And again, it's based on the prices that we're seeing coming through in tenders right now. So we can certainly follow up with contractors to find out what costs they are incurring for the supply and installation of street trees, if council would like that information.
Thank you, Sydney. I think that would be helpful, because I would be surprised if they were spending $1,000 a tree in the subdivisions. But, you know, I know things have gone up, but I guess if it doesn't cost us $850, it's not going to, you know, but we're still charging the homeowner or the person who severed the lot $1,000. Is there ever consideration for the option of having the, I guess I kind of understand it, that you can't kind of say, okay, when we build our house, we'll put the tree in and we'll give you your $1,000 back, so that the individual themselves can, we choose the tree, we pick it, but they put it in. I know that complicates things, so I'm going to withdraw that, but I still think $1,000 a tree is ridiculous.
Your worship?
Yeah, just in terms of the process, so the developers would be contracting a number of tree installations at once, and do we do that? Do we bulk tender? So if we've got 30 trees that need to be planted, do we go out and tender for 30 trees, or are we doing these on a one or two off at a time?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the former will issue a bulk contract.
It's still costing $800 or more for these trees that meet whatever the specifications are, certain height, certain type, certain diameter?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything further on the piece? Okay, seeing none, I'll read the recommendation. The council directs that for the year 2023, arena rental fees, save and except non-resident fees, be adjusted by 2% and not by the Statistics Canada Consumer Price Index, and further, that council approve the user fees and charges proposed in Appendix 1 to report number CBC 02/2023 and direct staff to submit a bylaw to council, and further, that council directs staff to submit a bylaw to council waiving all business license fees, save and except short-term rentals fees for the 2023 business licensing year to assist business. All in favor? Carried. Back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor McDermott. Well done. Mr. Jansen, I think you can sit down if you wish. So that takes us to the dates of the next meetings. The next budget meeting will be Wednesday, January the 18th, 2023, when we'll be dealing with the water and wastewater operating budget, followed in February on the 15th, 2023, the library general levy operating budget and assessment analysis. Those meetings start at 6 o'clock and they're held here in the council chambers. There being no further business, Councillor Dubanow.
Yes, Your Worship, I'd like to move that the Council Budget Committee adjourns at 7:51 p.m.
All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you all.